Steadily it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict, back with another listing review. Without further ado, let's jump right in. So we're going to take a look at this 1962 Lincoln Continental sedan. For this model year, there were just under 28,000 produced. What you're going to see with this listing on Bring a Trailer site, it is ending in less than 3 hours. I'm going to try to turn this video around pretty quick. For a long time, I was doing these reviews almost at the point that they listed on the site. Just been kind of juggling, normal stuff in life. So I haven't been able to do these routinely as early as I used to, but hopefully I'll continue to get back on track and do more of these listing reviews. Now, even if you're not in the market for a sedan, I'm sure you'll find some entertainment and or learn a few things as it relates to these very sought after 1960s Lincoln Continentals. If you like what I'm doing here, please consider subscribing. It's totally free. Also, Lincoln Addict podcast, however you find podcasts, including here on the channel, you can watch the video version of what I'm doing. So essentially what we have is front three-quarter shot. We can see it's a 62 Lincoln Continental. We've got those, what I refer to as the rectangles for the 62 model year in terms of the grille. That ties into the kind of the decals and the rear deck lid underneath the deck lid trim. So it's going to look very similar. That's the easiest way to tell these 62s apart, depending on the angle that you're looking at. We can also see that it has a rear antenna that was 61, 62 only. So that's a distinctive item from the side if we were trying to tell the difference between a 62 and a 63. We know the wide white walls for the most part were phased out by 62. My understanding and kind of reading and, talking to different people, you could still order a wider white wall in 62, but for the most part, it's pretty much, most of the vehicles at that time were running the slimmer white wall. Again, 61, you've got a wide white, not necessarily on 62. So that's going to be a preference thing depending on, we can look at these tires and see that they're bias ply. Depending on how old they are, you'd be looking to replace those anyways. And then you could certainly go with a thinner white wall. Now, in 60, if I remember this correctly, in 63, we had the amber turn signals. However, this, as we've stated, is a 62. So at some point, maybe one of these turn signals was broken and someone said, hey, let's go ahead and here's two of them. Or someone just liked the look of the amber versus the clear 462. I haven't been able to ever determine why they went in 63 to these ambers. And then back in 64, they were back to clear. But that's very one minor kind of small thing. If we get back on track, if I get back on track of just kind of reinforcing the overall items that we're seeing when we look at this rear three-quarter shot, again, you can see what I often refer to as those rectangles, that same kind of insignia, if you will, matches the front of the car. This car was prior ownership for about 5 decades, and it was acquired by the current seller in 2025 with a clean Indiana title at this point. You've got the gold metallic paint, and you've got the normal things that they're going to list on a Bring a Trailer write-up. And you've got blemishes and areas of corrosion are depicted in the gallery below. What I like so far about this car is it's a solid sedan. From what we can tell is it has the bones of an original car, kind of a survivor, if you will. As we scroll down here, you can see the interior. You've got that tuxedo interior that so many people really love, the black and white. I think it looks great. And you've got the wood grain as well. I think it goes well with the exterior color. I recently was looking at, I want to say it was something for 62 or 63, and it reinforced that the safety belts, aka seat belts, were available in either 62 or 63. And whether these came factory kind of as that dealer add-on or that extra add-on, not necessarily dealer add-on. I think that they could also come, I can't remember if they could also come from the factory or if they were in fact a dealer add-on, but it's pretty cool to see in the Lincoln Mercury documentation that I was looking at actually showed these buckles. So that's kind of cool. More to me almost looks like something out of aviation. But they definitely look good and they're great to have. I think at that point they were only available in the front, and I always want to say in 60, maybe in 64, they became available in the rear for the most part off the top of my head. We could see a beautiful interior. Again, I love the wood grain, what they used, the materials in that era. We can see it has the Ultronic eye. It is an AC car, which they have listed. And then we've got the 3 distinctive pods, which of course go away after the 63 model year. They do talk about the air condition, the 134A refrigerant, so it has been converted, which is a great thing. Oftentimes we hear, oh, AC, it's an AC car, probably just needs to be recharged. These folks, over the course of time, took the effort to make sure it's ready, and that's going to help a seller, if you will, when they're looking to move a car like this. What we can see from the engine bay, of course, the original MEL or Mercury Edsel Lincoln 430. We can see that it does have the battery box, which are often kind of discarded over the course of time. In 62, we've got the horns up on that passenger apron. That's where they go for this particular year. We can see that it does have the shielding underneath here for uh, the fuel lines that come in from the driver's side apron. We can see that it also has a single pot reservoir for the brake reservoir. Okay, underneath the car is what you would expect in terms of the photos I've seen and looking at here. You're gonna have your normal kind of grittiness and corrosion and things like that, but it doesn't look like, from what we can see, anything too terribly bad. It's like basically business as usual underneath there. Now, typically I have my little presentation put together, and more I'm finding I just don't necessarily need to do that because Bring a Trailer does such a great job of breaking down this plate here. We can see, of course, we know it's a 4-door sedan. It's the gold metallic. It's the white and black leather. The build date was July 25th. And we can see with those last 5 numbers, 29,874, it was at the tail end of the production. Now, 27,849 were produced in terms of the sedans. However, 31,061 total units, and that's where you get to the serial number 29,874. So this would have been July 25th of 1962, and towards the tail end of that production run. The DSO is Cincinnati, Ohio, which is an area where there would be of concern if this car was driven in harsh conditions. You'd want to pay extra attention underneath, kind of the undercarriage of the car, if you will. I'm not going to play these videos, but there's a walk around, there's an engine, there's another walk around, a couple of them. There is a driving video. Videos are really worth their weight in gold. You can actually get a chance to really kind of dissect a bunch of stuff. The photos are key as well, so we're going to kind of go through these here. We can see, again, the amber turn signals. That is very minor. I only point that out because people would point it out if I don't, and they certainly don't look bad. They look really good on this particular year car. Kind of the money shot there with all 4 of the coach doors open, and you've got what appears to be the new or OG original floor mats. Whether they're original or the repop ones, they look really good. Definitely look way better than kind of what sometimes people just throw something modern in, like a plastic modern looking one, and they don't look as good. So this looks good to me. What we can see here, the rear deck lid, like I mentioned. And every time we try to zoom in here, it doesn't like it. We can see that these larger rectangles tie into that front end of the grille. No real crazy denser dings that I'm seeing in these bumper ends. The bumper looks really good. This car presents pretty well from what we're seeing so far in the photos. We can see the the passenger side. And I always like to look here kind of at the dog leg. As I've talked about, that's what is referred to here, this section. I always like to look at the lower door portion as well. On my 64, I've got a little bit of bubbling here. And I've often said that, that's not the end of the world. You're going to have typically some of those things. But from what we can see here, again, in photos, it does look really, really nice, which is awesome. You've got different photos around town. Of course, 61, 62, 63 resemble so much of many distinctive key items, and one of those items is the curved glass, which is certainly a thing that many people love. There are some dents and dings that they point out in these peak moldings. This is not a deal breaker whatsoever. If you have someone around you that specializes in taking these dents and dings out, certainly you can have that person kind of work their magic. But what we're seeing is kind of a driver quality car so far. 62, like I said, the antenna is still on the rear at this point. It doesn't move to the front until 63. And then, of course, it's in the peak molding. So the peak molding is kind of, it has a break in it, if you will. And then you've got this little piece. And if I remember correctly, I believe this is pot metal versus the regular stainless. And then you've got your antenna there. Which is kind of cool. Again, they call out some of the blemishes, which is very fair of the seller. And my 64 has something very similar here kind of going on. These cars were often at some point, whether it would be the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, they were more than likely resprayed. Many of these cars were. And in that era, and you'll still see it sometimes where I'm not a paint on body guy, so to speak, but you'll see where folks will just kind of tape up a car and, the old school term was like a quick respray versus blowing off all of the moldings and things like that. And sometimes you'll kind of have a little bit of this overspray get on some of those, the weather stripping, if you will, and things like that. So that's what it kind of appears there. Again, it's great that the sellers, show these details because the last thing that anybody wants to do is buy a car and then get it and be like, wow, I thought this car was, a 10 of 10, a concourse car. And certainly most of the cars that we see on here that we're going to be able to purchase are not going to be at that level. And that's okay. These are driver quality cars and you can get in them and enjoy them. And if you want to take your car to the next level, you certainly can do that. It's always a great opportunity to look inside the doors when we have shots like this. I-64 came from northern Indiana into Michigan. Wasn't really driven during the harsh winters, but I always like to look underneath these doors and we can kind of see a little bit of stuff going on here. More than likely, there's not any kind of deal breaker, so to speak, there. But if I was looking at this car in person, I would want to do that. We could see inside the door jambs do look good. I always forget if it was 62. I always want to say it was 63. You can see this door plate. Don't be alarmed. It is in this location and either in 62 or 63. I always forget. It does move to the actual door. So this is a normal spot for it, which I believe because this was the into the production run in 62. I believe it's in 63. It moves at some point from where your left foot would be kind of in that wheel well area to the inside of the door. We can see that it does also have, these are the black door switches. Chris at Lincoln Land has reinforced to me over the course of time. I think the replacements that you mostly see will be white, so it is nice to see the black. That means that those are original as well. A couple things that are called out in the photos. There's going to be a photo that we're going to see where this is circled. So there is a little bit better photo. If you look right here, this you might scratch your head and go, what is this? And I'm sure someone asked in the comments, hence they called it out. The hazard lights, believe it or not, were not available until like the 64 model year, which is pretty rare. 65, you see them a little bit more. However, in that era, if you've ever researched and you've looked into adding hazard lights to your vehicle, because believe it or not, they did not have them. There's a few companies that made these back in the day in ambulances and support vehicles and things like that, first responders. They would have had those on their vehicles, and you could typically kind of source one of these. This wouldn't have been 100% factory, but to me, it's really cool that they added the hazard lights. I always love that option. I also like the fact that, it's working from what I understand, so that's kind of cool. And it looks normal there in terms of the grand scheme of things. In terms of where they mounted it. We can see it also has the speed control, also known as cruise control, which was an option in that era. And that is pretty cool as well. Now, something else to point out. Now, I would tend to get 62, 63 mixed up, but recently I've tried to ingrain this on my brain. If you look here, you do not have the manual deal to open these vent windows. That's because in 62, this was an option and it was about $75.60 and you would have had on these top two switches here that would control the little motor to open those vent windows. Again, 62, that was a new option. You will see 62s with the manual little crank, if you will, but this one has the $75, almost $76 option. You can see here where he's called off the speed control and then the hazard light thing. One notable difference in the 61, 62, 63, you're going to use your left hand to insert the key on the left of the steering wheel. In 64, that of course moves to the right of the steering wheel. But I really love the dashes in 61, 62, and 63. They're very similar in a lot of ways. And I personally like kind of the wood grain, as I mentioned earlier. I also like that the key is on the left side. It's just a little bit different than, for instance, the cars that I own. We could see here the pods, or here's the main one pod, 62, and I believe it changes in 63. Instead of a battery, I believe it says alternator here, because I think in a 63 they went to an alternator. That's something I haven't really talked a lot about. We can also see that this looks really good. Oftentimes around these pods, you're going to see almost like what appears to be uh, like almost like a clear coat that's coming off. And I've talked about, you can get that quadruple zero wool, so the 4 zeros, and some Brasso polish. And if you ever have that, you can really clean these up. However, this one, from a factory perspective, looks really, really good. It looks like it has that brushed original finish. Haven't seen one that nice in a while. The dashes are very similar in 61, 62, 63. I'm a big fan of the 63 dash. I mean, they're very similar. And you can kind of see it's got the two main pods almost. You've got like the driver pod, and then you've got this passenger pod. And it's very distinctive. And then you've got the tie-in to the radio knobs with the wood grain color. We can, of course, see the factory radio, the air condition in 62, no longer hidden, if you will, in terms of this panel here. And that's typical from what we typically see. We could see in here, you've got a little bit of crustiness inside the doors, nothing alarming, but like little things like that, I would want to kind of check out if I was looking at this car in person. Knowing that this car was in Ohio, it looks dang good underneath for if it was driven at all in harsh conditions. Of course, you do have some areas there that you would want to just kind of inspect, but more than likely not a deal breaker. A beautiful looking trunk area. You've just got that original look. Hard to tell if maybe these are Jim Wallace panels or a carpet kit over the course of time, but we also look underneath the deck lid. I often talk about how nasty underneath the deck lids could sometimes be, and you're going to typically have a little bit of this. This is all normal stuff here that you're kind of seeing, but I mean, this one looks pretty dry, pretty clean, pretty nice. You've got the original sticker here, which is fantastic. If we continue on and jump back a couple of photos here. The one area of the interior that was like kind of a little bit of concern is these the visors have gotten a little bit more expensive. Typically on the convertibles, they're more expensive. And a little bit of dinginess here, but certainly more than likely, if you steamed this or you use some sort of kind of soap and water, or let's just say for whatever reason you decided, hey, I'm going to have my local upholsterer go ahead and go and redo these, you've got a little bit of tear, you could certainly clean those up. Again, not a deal breaker whatsoever, very minor in the grand scheme of things. We can see it does have the original jack. You do not always see that. We got a very, very clean engine bay. I talked a little bit about that earlier. We can see that it does have the 3-port fuel pump on it, which is fantastic. We've got new insulation up underneath the hood, which is fantastic. And then we want to take a look underneath the car and in the engine bay. For the most part, everything looks pretty normal up underneath. However, I will say the exhaust was like the exhaust on my 64 when I got it. I mean, it was pretty thrashed. You're seeing more than likely the person that's going to get this car, if you're going to keep it original, you can buy exhaust from some of the usual suspects out there. You can go to your local exhaust place. I would personally replace the exhaust with some stainless. You can see kind of a hole in here. And again, that's just going to be over the course of time. A little bit of grittiness underneath, but this is all standard. Typically, you're going to have a little bit of leaks on these cars, and they're usually a lot nastier. But you can see a little bit of nastiness underneath here, and it certainly doesn't look as bad as others that I've seen. The one other thing that I would say, they do have mufflers and resonators, so you've got the two underneath and you've got these two as well. That's what keeps those cars extra quiet. The gas tank itself looks a little gritty here. I believe there's a company making the 61 2s and 3s tanks now. 64, 65 have been made for a while, but depending on if this tank was ever cleaned or if it was nasty at all on the inside, you would potentially want to look at replacing that gas tank. That's just something that I kind of noticed. You've got a couple of manuals here as well. So in closing, I would love to hear what you have to say about this particular car. Now, again, 2.5 hours left. It's at 15,250. It is a 62, and again, on Brand Trailer, I have no affiliation to them. If I type in 1962 Lincoln in the search box, the most recent 62 sedan sold for on August 22nd, $1,000. It was a really nice car. Prior to that, we had a custom that went up to $133,000 for a sedan, did not sell, so it was no reserve. And then back in December, basically about a year ago, we had a 62 sedan hit no reserve at $23,350. So it is hard to say what this car will go for. I mean, I think the bones look good. I mean, to me, my gut feeling is it should at least hit $30,000 to $35,000. We've seen some weird numbers coming in here over the course of time where, you know, cars that really, in my opinion, shouldn't go for as much as they are, they go for more. And then cars that I think should go for more go for less. So it really just depends. Obviously, December, a lot of folks are focused on the holidays, but I would also argue someone that's ready to kind of jump in the Lincoln game and has the money ready to make a purchase, they're not going to really care what point of year it is. They're just going to be looking to get a nice car, and you could hopefully keep this car stock, or you could customize it. It's obviously going to be up to the owner. The last thing that I'll say before I close this out is if I go down to the comments, it was at 10,000 just a couple of hours ago, and it jumped up $5,000. So I do think it's going to get it's going to bounce up here. The seller does appear to be active, which I've continued to reinforce. I think is a huge thing. You got to be active if you're looking to sell your car. There's going to be people asking questions, and they're going to feel way more confident in the fact that you're willing to answer questions, or even maybe say, hey, yeah, if you know somebody in the area that wants to come scope out the car, come do it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for the support, ODB, the Lincoln Addict. We're out of here. Peace.
Welcome to LA where the players play, and we